Let's jump straight into today's explainer, folks. We're unpacking a highly charged, deeply provocative essay titled, "This is None of Our Black Business." It's a striking piece of Afro-pessimist writing that offers a really unflinching critique of American society. As we go through this today, our goal is to objectively map out the author's core arguments and truly understand the profound frustrations driving this intense rhetoric. Right off the bat, the author hits us with this incredibly striking, colloquial hook. Black people in America have been uninvited to the cookout. By using such a familiar cultural touchstone, a cookout, which is all about community, family, and being welcomed, the author immediately paints a picture of a deep, deliberate, systemic exclusion. It perfectly sets the tone for an essay that argues Black Americans are being actively pushed away from the table of American society. So, to really break this down, we're going to deconstruct the text's arguments through 5 main pillars: the societal disinvitation, historical roots of chaos, a system in decay, global ramifications, and finally, the recommended stance. Starting off with Part 1, the societal disinvitation. The source asserts that there's a very clear message being broadcast to Black people in America right now. According to the text, they've basically been instructed to just maintain their position, mainly because they are simply unwanted in the day-to-day mechanisms and governmental decisions of the country. But here's the catch. The author doesn't frame this as a tragedy to be mourned. Instead, it's treated as a harsh reality to just accept, famously stating, "None of this is our Black business." The core argument here, the societal architects want to manage their creation completely alone, and the author's stance is essentially, fine, let them. That brings us to Section 2, historical roots of chaos. Now, what's fascinating is how the author uses a very grim interpretation of history to back up this modern-day stance. Tracing a chronological timeline, the text argues that European colonizers originally fled their own murderous actions and endless wars in Europe, hoping for a totally fresh start. But the author asserts that when they arrived in the New World, that violent nature wasn't left behind at all. It was actually weaponized. The text states they built a whole societal matrix on stolen land and literally incorporated slavery, selling Black people into its very foundation. Fast forward 250 years, and the author sees a society just walking in circles of inertia, completely unable to escape its own foundational violence. And this brings us to a stark illustration of what the text views as foundational American hypocrisy. On one side of the ledger, you've got this claimed civility, right? The grand promises of equality, fairness, an open invitation to the poor and tired. But the author calls these promises completely hollow. Because on the other side, the text argues the actual foundation of the society was woven together through slavery, murder, disenfranchisement, prejudice, and segregation. Essentially, the essay contends that society lied just to boost its numbers, all while masking a foundation of white entitlement behind a pretty facade of equality. Moving right along to Section 3, a system in decay. The author absolutely does not mince words when it comes to modern political leadership. Pointing specifically to political decisions made since 2016, the argument is that the system is disintegrating into total chaos by elevating highly unqualified individuals. The text describes this precarious situation where the center is failing and the people in charge are hanging on by the skin of their teeth. And they're doing this by relying on a false sense of superiority that has supposedly rewarded them for centuries. The essay goes on to identify some very specific symptoms of the societal decay. For instance, it claims there's a running trend of promoting pure incompetence into positions of prominence. It paints a picture of unqualified, mediocre leadership, basically stumbling blindly for answers to problems that they themselves created. The text even uses this stark metaphor, calling it worse than the blind leading the blind, framing it instead as the infirmed leading the crippled. On top of that, the author points to attempts to erase Black history and achievements as a clear symptom of a masked inferiority complex. According to the essay, as these failures keep mounting, a slow, undeniable buzz of panic is setting in among the societal architects. Let's look at Section 4, global ramifications. The essay posits a distinctly bleak view of the United States' standing on the international stage. It characterizes the nation as a failed experiment that has nearly come full circle. The text argues that the rest of the global community isn't exactly looking to America for leadership anymore. Instead, the author claims the world is basically waiting in eager anticipation for the falling and failure of the United States, watching a story play out that might very well come to an abysmal end. There's a really striking definition presented in the source material here. The text argues that the United States has victimized the entire planet, offering only white supremacy as its chief export. That's a heavy claim.
Because of this exclusionary attitude, the author argues that the nation only looks inward to itself for answers. And since they are, according to the text, striving for a watered-down, bland, and benign kind of whiteness, no real answers can actually be found. The result? A cascade into a madness entirely of their own creation.
Which leads us to our final section. Part 5, the recommended stance. In a pretty stark call to inaction, the author advises Black Americans to essentially just wash their hands of the whole situation. The text warns that the crazed hatred held tightly for the last 100 years has been fully unleashed, making it actively dangerous to engage. So, what are the recommended steps? Number 1, maintain your position just outside of their reach. Number 2, sit on the sidelines as these minds go about dismantling their own society. And number 3, let them clean up their own mess. The author explicitly warns against offering even one more sacrifice to a society that, frankly, no longer wishes to be inclusive.
The author concludes this manifesto with a really powerful rhythmic triplet that serves as a final damning verdict. It starts with this. This was all predictable. The essay argues that if you just look at the historical timeline, the murderous nature, the stolen land, the entire institution of slavery, well, the current societal decay could be seen coming from miles away. Then they follow it up by stating, this was all avoidable. This really highlights the tragic nature of the collapse. The text suggests that different choices, maybe a genuine commitment to that claimed civility and equality rather than just hollow promises and exclusion, could have entirely prevented this integration. And finally, the gut punch. This was all inevitable. Ultimately, the text cements its Afro-pessimist worldview right here. It claims that because the societal architects absolutely refused to change, because they preserved their exclusionary process completely unabated, this abysmal end was always bound to happen. The sheer inertia of their 250-year history made the collapse unavoidable in the end. So, as you process everything in this explainer, take a moment to really sit with this final question. What does this manifesto reveal about the current state of racial and political discourse? Regardless of where you personally stand, analyzing source material like this is absolutely vital. It forces us to confront the deep fractures, the intense rhetoric, and the profound frustrations existing within our modern society. Ask yourself, how can feelings of systemic exclusion lead to a worldview that advocates for entirely sitting out of the societal experiment? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive today. Keep asking those hard questions and keep seeking to understand the ideas shaping our world.